In the ivory tower of the Thorne Corporation, silence wasn't a lack of sound. It was a weapon. I sat at my desk, the mahogany surface polished so bright it reflected my own exhaustion. Through the glass walls of the corner office, Theodore was staring at me. To the rest of the floor, he was the predator, the powerful CEO who held his secretary's career by a thread. They whispered that he forced me to stay late. They whispered that I was his puppet, if only they knew. The rumors were the perfect camouflage. My coworkers watched me walk into his office at 7:00 p.m. and saw a victim. They saw a beautiful woman trapped by a powerful man. Theodore Thorne was 60 stories of charisma and ruthless ambition, a man who had never lost a deal in his life. But as the door clicked shut behind me, the power dynamic didn't just shift, it inverted. He didn't stand up to greet me. He didn't even look me in the eye. He was waiting for his orders. "The quarterly reports are on your desk," I said, my voice cool and professional. I didn't sit in the guest chair. I sat in his. Theodore remained standing by the window, his broad shoulders tensed under a bespoke suit. "Alex, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The board is starting to ask questions about the offshore transfers. I can't keep hiding the paper trail." I leaned back, spinning his chair slowly. "Then you aren't trying hard enough, Theo." To the world, we were the ultimate cliché. The billionaire and the girl from the typing pool. We played the part in public, the lingering glances, the secret dinners at five-star restaurants where I looked appropriately demure. It was a romance that scandalized the boardroom. They thought he was blackmailing me for my silence, using his wealth to keep me in his bed. In reality, the bed was cold, and the only thing keeping him in line was the digital folder encrypted on my server. It started 3 years ago. I wasn't hired for my shorthand. I was hired because I was invisible. Theodore Thorne had a secret that could level the global economy, a systematic fraud that made the Enron scandal look like a lemonade stand. He thought he could hide it in plain sight. He thought a pretty girl from a state school wouldn't understand the complex algorithms of his high-frequency trading. He was wrong. I was a math prodigy who just needed an opening. I'll never forget the night I confronted him. It was raining, much like tonight. I had walked into this very office with a single flash drive. I didn't want a promotion. I didn't want a settlement. I wanted the throne. "You have 2 choices, Mr. Thorne," I had told him as he poured a celebratory scotch. "You can go to prison for the rest of your natural life, or you can become the face of my company while I run every single move from the shadows." He had laughed at first. He thought I was joking. Then I showed him the mirror transaction I had set up, a kill switch that would alert the SEC the moment I stopped typing my daily password. His face had turned a shade of gray I didn't know existed. Now, 3 years later, the Thorne Corporation was more profitable than ever. But Theodore was a hollow shell, a handsome mask for a woman who didn't exist on any corporate charter. I was the ghost in the machine. The intercom buzzed, breaking the tension. It was Marcus, the head of security. Marcus was the only one who looked at me with genuine pity. He thought I was the most tragic woman in New York. "Mr. Thorne, Miss Vance's car is downstairs. The gala starts in 20 minutes. Theodore looked at me, a silent plea in his eyes. "Go," I said, standing up. "Smile for the cameras. Tell them I'm the light of your life. And Theo, don't let me catch you looking at the wine list." At the gala, the air was thick with perfume and the scent of old money. We arrived arm in arm, the crown prince and his captive princess. The flashbulbs were blinding. Theodore played his part perfectly, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. To the photographers, it was a gesture of love. To me, it was the feeling of a man clinging to a life raft. "You look beautiful, Alex," he whispered for the benefit of a nearby reporter. "Save it for the bedroom," I hissed back. But tonight, something felt different. As we moved through the crowd of elite investors, I noticed a man in a charcoal suit watching us. He wasn't a journalist, and he wasn't a CEO. He had the eyes of a wolf. Every time we turned, he was there, standing just outside the circle of light. I felt Theodore's hand tremble against my silk dress. "Theo," I murmured, keeping my smile fixed. Who is the man in the charcoal suit? Theodore swallowed hard. I don't know. I didn't believe him. Theodore was a terrible liar when he wasn't reading from my scripts. We reached the VIP lounge, away from the prying eyes of the press. I pulled him into a corner. Tell me the truth. Is that a creditor? Is it the feds? Theodore looked over his shoulder, his eyes darting frantically. It's worse, Alex. It's Julian. The name hit me like a physical blow. Julian Thorne. Theodore's dead brother. The man who was supposed to have perished in a plane crash a decade ago. You said he was dead, I whispered, my heart beginning to race. The romantic thriller everyone thought we were living in was suddenly shifting into a horror story. I saw the dental records, Theo. I saw the crash report. Theodore shook his head, his face pale. I lied. I didn't just hide the money, Alex. I hid him. He was the one who started the fraud. I just inherited the mess. If Julian was alive, my leverage was meaningless. He wasn't a CEO with a reputation to lose. Julian Thorne stepped into the lounge, the charcoal suit fitting him like armor. He looked like an older, more dangerous version of Theodore. He didn't look at his brother. He looked at me. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. So, he said, his voice a deep, melodic rasp. This is the little genius who's been spending my money. Theodore told me you were talented. He didn't mention you were the one holding the leash. I didn't flinch. I had spent 3 years staring down one thorn. I could handle another. The leash is short, Julian, I said, stepping forward, and the cage is already built. If you're back, it means you're broke, and I don't give handouts to ghosts. Julian laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. He pulled a small device from his pocket, a carbon copy of my encrypted server. I'm not here for a handout, Alex. I'm here to thank you for keeping the seat warm. The twist was instantaneous. Julian tapped a button on the device and my phone vibrated in my clutch. A notification appeared. Access denied. Password changed. In 5 seconds, the math prodigy had been locked out of her own empire. Theodore stepped away from me, his shaking hands suddenly steady. He walked over to his brother and stood by his side. The blackmail is over, Alex, Theodore said, his voice finally strong. Did you really think I'd let a secretary run my life forever? The air in the VIP lounge turned to ice. Theodore wasn't cowering anymore. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Julian, the two brothers forming a wall of Thorne steel. I looked at my phone, the access-denied screen glowing like a taunt. For 3 years, I had been the puppet master, but I had forgotten one rule of the theater. The puppets only move as long as they don't have a better offer. Theodore hadn't been broken. He had been waiting for reinforcements. Segment 17. You played a dangerous game, Alex, Julian said, stepping closer until I could smell the expensive tobacco on his coat. You thought you were the only one who understood the algorithms? I wrote the original code. Theodore was just the face, and you were just a temporary patch. But the patch is being removed tonight. He reached out, his fingers grazing the pearls at my neck. I didn't pull away. If I showed fear now, I was already dead. You're a ghost, Julian, I hissed, my voice steady despite the hammer of my heart. If you reveal yourself to take back the company, you reveal the fraud. You'll both go down. The SEC doesn't care who wrote the code. They care who stole the billions. Theodore smirked, a look of genuine malice I'd never seen on his face. That's the beauty of it, Alex. We aren't going to prison. You are. We've spent the last 6 months rerouting every illegal transfer to your private accounts. My mind raced, triple-checking every back door I had built. They had been planning this for months. While I was busy blackmailing Theodore and playing the role of the pampered secretary, they were building a digital gallows for me. The board thinks you've been the one extorting me, Theodore continued. They have the recordings. They have the logs. To the world, I'm the victim of a brilliant sociopathic assistant. The romance? Just another part of your leverage. The irony was a bitter pill. The very rumors I used as camouflage were now being used as evidence of my guilt. Check your personal laptop, Alex, Julian suggested with a wink. You'll find a suicide note already drafted, expressing your deep regret for the embezzlement and the unrequited obsession with my brother. It's very touching. Almost made me cry. They weren't just taking the company back, they were erasing me entirely. You won't get away with this, I said, backing toward the exit, but the door was blocked. Marcus, the head of security, the man I thought pitied me, was standing there. He wasn't looking at me with pity anymore. He was looking at Julian with reverence. The car is ready, Mr. Thorne, Marcus said. The police have been notified of a security breach at Miss Vance's apartment. They'll find the flash drives exactly where we planted them. I was trapped in a room with 3 men who had spent their lives winning at any cost. But they made one mistake. They thought I was a secretary who got lucky with math. They didn't realize that a woman who survives 3 years in a den of lions doesn't do it with just a password. I reached for the clasp of my evening bag, my fingers finding the small, jagged edge of a physical override key I'd hidden in the lining. Julian, you're a genius, I said, a cold smile finally touching my lips. But you've been dead for 10 years. Technology has changed. I pressed the override key. It didn't unlock the server. It triggered a localized EMP burst I'd installed in my own jewelry for an emergency just like this. Every light in the VIP lounge flickered and died. The brothers' tablets went black. The electronic lock on the door clicked open as the system reverted to fail-safe mode. In the pitch black, I didn't run for the door. I ran for the bar. I grabbed a heavy glass decanter of scotch and shattered it against the mahogany. Marcus! Theodore yelled, his voice cracking in the dark. Get her! I heard the security chief lunging toward where I had been standing, but I was already sliding behind a velvet curtain. I knew this floor plan better than my own home. I had memorized it specifically for the night the lions turned on me. I slipped through a service door that led to the kitchen. The staff was busy with the main gala, the chaos of the blackout giving me 30 seconds of anonymity. I grabbed a waiter's discarded jacket, throwing it over my silk dress. My pearls were dead weight now, the EMP having fried the hidden transmitter inside them. I needed to get to the main server room at the Thorne building. If I could reach the physical hardware, I could wipe the evidence they'd planted. I emerged into the gala ballroom. It was a sea of confused socialites and flickering emergency lights. I saw Julian and Theodore burst onto the floor, their faces frantic as they scanned the crowd for a woman in a blue silk dress. They didn't see the waiter slipping through the service exit. I hit the street, the cold New York rain soaking through the thin jacket. I didn't have a phone, a car, or a cent. All I had was the override key and the rage in my veins. I hopped into a taxi, the driver looking skeptically at my wet, disheveled appearance. Thorne Tower, I said, pulling a diamond earring from my ear and handing it to him. This covers the fare and your silence. Drive fast. He didn't ask questions. As we sped through the neon-soaked streets, I realized the stakes had changed. This wasn't about a company or a throne anymore. This was a romantic thriller that had ended in a divorce, and I was taking everything in the settlement. The Thorne Tower was a fortress of glass and steel. Security would be on high alert, and my biometric access would be revoked. I went to the back alley, to the trash compactor area. I'd spent 6 months bribing a janitor to lose his keycard in this specific dumpster every Friday. I dug through the damp cardboard until my fingers hit plastic. The card was there. It was low-level access, but in a building this smart, low-level was all I needed to start a fire. I reached the 40th floor, the climate-controlled heart of the company. The servers hummed with the sound of billions of dollars moving every second. I approached the main terminal, the red lights of the security cameras tracking my movement. Hello, Julian, I whispered to the lens. I know you're watching. Back at the gala, he'd be seeing my face on his mobile backup by now. He'd be screaming for Marcus to get to the tower. I had 5 minutes. I didn't try to hack the password. I didn't try to bypass the encryption. I took the physical override key and jammed it into the server's manual reset port. If I can't have the throne, I said, the screen reflected in my eyes, nobody can. I didn't just wipe the evidence. I triggered the nuclear option, a command that would distribute the Thorne brothers' entire offshore fortune to every single employee, charity, and pension fund on their list. The glass ceiling was about to shatter. The screen turned a violent shade of crimson. A progress bar appeared. Redistribution in progress. 12%. The sounds of the server room changed. the fan spinning into a high-pitched whine as the processor struggled to handle the massive volume of outgoing wires. I wasn't just stealing their money, I was making it public. I was turning their private hoard into a global headline. Theodore and Julian had spent their lives building a wall of gold. I was turning it into a window. Suddenly, the heavy reinforced door at the end of the hall hissed open. I didn't turn around. I knew that heavy, rhythmic footstep. "Step away from the terminal, Alex." It was Marcus. He was holding a sidearm, the barrel leveled directly at my head. His face was a mask of professional indifference. "The brothers are on the elevator. They told me to make sure you didn't leave this room alive. Don't make me do this the hard way." "You're a good soldier, Marcus," I said, my fingers still flying across the backup keyboard. "But soldiers usually like to get paid. Check your bank account. I just sent the first wave of bonuses to the security staff." Marcus hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the smartwatch on his wrist. It buzzed. Then it buzzed again. His eyes widened as he saw the numbers. $5 million, he whispered. "That's just the tip of the iceberg," I replied. "Julian Thorne isn't going to pay you $5 million to kill me," I continued, finally turning to face him. "He's going to kill you to keep your mouth shut about tonight. You know how the Thornes work. They don't leave witnesses, they leave accidents." I saw the doubt clouding his features. The gun didn't lower, but the trigger finger loosened. Outside the room, the elevator dinked. The brothers had arrived. "Choose your side, Marcus. Now." The door slammed open. Julian and Theodore burst in, their faces flushed with rage and the physical exertion of the hunt. Theodore looked at the screen, his knees nearly buckling. "What did you do?" he shrieked. "That's the Cayman's account. That's the pension fund." Julian didn't scream. He looked at Marcus. "Kill her! Now! What are you waiting for?" Marcus didn't move. He stood like a statue between the brothers and the woman who had just made him a multimillionaire. "Marcus?" Julian's voice dropped into that terrifying, quiet rasp. "I gave you an order." Marcus finally lowered the gun, but he didn't holster it. He stepped to the side, clearing a path for me. "The money is already gone, Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, his voice flat. "And my contract just expired." Julian let out a roar of frustration and lunged toward the terminal, but I was already there, the override key held like a dagger over the execute button. "One more step and I release the Julian Thorne identity files to the Interpol database," I threatened. Julian froze. The ghost couldn't afford to be seen. If those files went live, he wouldn't just be broke, he'd be the most wanted man in Europe. Theodore looked between his brother and me, the realization finally sinking in. The secretary had won. "What do you want, Alex?" Theodore asked, his voice broken. "What is the price for our lives?" "I don't want your money," I said, pulling the key out and pocketing it. "I already gave that away. I don't want your company. It's a hollow shell of fraud. I want the truth." I pulled a small digital recorder from the waiter's jacket. "You're going to sit down and narrate every single crime you've committed for the last decade. Every bribe, every forged signature, every lie. You're going to give me the only thing you have left, your confession." "You're insane," Julian hissed. "We'll never talk." I shrugged and pointed at the screen. "Redistribution, 85%. In 5 minutes, the FBI will be at your front door. The redistribution has left a digital trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to your private servers. If you sign this confession and name Julian as the mastermind, Theodore, you might get 5 years. If you don't, you both get life. Tick-tock, boys." The brothers looked at each other. For the first time in their lives, the Thorne blood wasn't enough to save them. The loyalty they'd bragged about in the lounge vanished in the face of a cold prison cell. Theodore broke first. He grabbed the recorder. "It was Julian. He started it in 2014. I was just following orders." Julian lunged for his brother's throat, but Marcus was there, pinning him to the wall with a single, massive hand. For the next hour, the air in the server room was thick with the sound of the Thorne Empire collapsing into a digital tape. They told me everything. The blackmail, the fake plane crash, the secret accounts. It was a masterpiece of corruption. As the final wire transfer hit 100%, the screens went dark. The money was gone. The Thorne Corporation was a ghost. And I had the only copy of the truth. "We're done," I said, taking the recorder. I looked at Theodore, the man I had once shared a fake romance with. He looked small. He looked like the secretary now. "The police are downstairs, Marcus. Show them the way." Marcus nodded, letting the brothers out in handcuffs. I stayed in the dark room, the silence finally feeling like peace. But as I turned to leave, I saw a single red light blinking on Julian's discarded tablet. I picked it up. It wasn't a bank alert. It was a message from a private satellite. Package 2 secured. Proceed to Phase 3. My blood turned to ice. Package 2? I whispered. I realized then that the Thorne brothers weren't the top of the food chain. They were just middle management. There was a Phase 3. And if Julian was a ghost, then his boss was something much more terrifying. I wasn't out of the game. I had just moved to a higher level. I walked out of Thorne Tower as the sun began to rise over Manhattan. The news was already breaking. Thorne Empire collapses in global charity heist. I saw my sister's face on a nearby digital billboard, under a headline about a missing witness. My heart stopped. Julian's message wasn't about money. Package 2 was her. They knew I'd take the money, and they'd used it as a distraction to grab the only thing I couldn't replace. I stood on the sidewalk, the rain finally stopping. I had no money, no job, and a confession that was now a death warrant for my family. My phone, the one Marcus had returned to me, buzzed. A new number, a video file. I pressed play and saw my sister sitting in a room that looked exactly like Theodore's office. A voice, deeper and more refined than Julian's, spoke from off-camera. "Well played, Alex. Now let's talk about the ransom." The video played in a loop, a cruel reminder of my failure. Sarah looked unharmed, but the clinical perfection of the room, the marble floors, the gold-leafed desk, screamed of a power far beyond the Thorne brothers. Julian and Theodore were just street thugs in tailored suits compared to this. The voice on the recording didn't sound angry. It sounded amused. "You've proven you can dismantle a legacy, Alex. Now prove you can build one. You have 12 hours to find the Key of Solomon." The Key of Solomon. I stared at the blank screen of my phone. It wasn't an ancient artifact. It was a legendary piece of software, a mythical decryption engine rumored to be able to crack any blockchain in existence. Julian must have been hunting it for years. If I wanted Sarah back, I had to find something that most experts believed didn't even exist. I looked back at the towering glass of Thorne Tower. The answers weren't in the servers I'd just wiped. They were in the one place I hadn't looked. Theodore's private residence. It was a penthouse in the Upper East Side, a fortress of biometric locks and high-end security. With Marcus now in police custody, and the brothers in holding, the building would be crawling with federal agents soon. I had a narrow window to break into the home of the man I had spent 3 years pretending to love. I hailed a cab, my mind already mapping the ventilation shafts and service elevators of the Thorne penthouse. The lobby of the apartment building was a sea of blue windbreakers. FBI. I slipped into the dry cleaner's entrance next door, a route I'd used once when Theodore wanted a specific suit at 3 a.m. I climbed the service stairs, 42 flights of grueling concrete, my lungs burning. When I reached the top, I used the janitor's card I'd stolen earlier. The service door to the penthouse groaned open. The air inside was still, smelling of expensive lilies and betrayal. I didn't head for the safe or the office. I went to the nursery. Theodore didn't have children, but he had a room filled with vintage toys, a bizarre hobby that the tabloids called eccentric. I knew better. Theodore was a man of patterns. He hid his most valuable assets in plain sight, disguised as innocence. I approached a 1920s rocking horse, my fingers searching the hand-carved wood until I felt a slight indentation under the saddle. A small compartment clicked open. Inside wasn't a drive, but an old-fashioned brass key and a slip of paper with a handwritten address, The Cloisters, 11 p.m. My heart hammered. The Key of Solomon wasn't digital, at least not yet. It was physical. Theodore had been acting as a guardian for something much bigger than himself. But as I tucked the key into my pocket, the lights in the nursery flared to life. "I knew you'd come for the horse, Alex." I spun around. It wasn't a Fed. It was Julian. He was covered in blood, his tuxedo jacket torn, looking like he'd crawled through a mile of broken glass to get here. He must have escaped the transport or bribed his way out of the tower before the police arrived. He held a small, lethal-looking revolver, his hand shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and rage. "Theodore is weak," he rasped. "He told the feds everything, but he didn't tell them about the key." "Julian, you're bleeding out," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Give me the gun. We can use the key to get Sarah back, and you can disappear. You can finally be the ghost you've been pretending to be." Julian laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "You think I care about the girl? The key is worth billions. With that code, I don't need a name or a company. I can reset the world." He stepped forward, the barrel of the gun inches from my forehead. "Hand it over, Secretary," he commanded. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing the cold brass. I looked into his eyes that had seen the end of the world and were eager to bring it about. I realized then that Julian didn't have the Phase 3 message. He was being hunted by the same people who had Sarah. He was a cornered animal, and I was the only thing standing between him and his perceived salvation. "It's not here, Julian," I lied, my voice a whisper. "The horse is empty. Theodore moved it." His eyes darted to the rocking horse, and in that split second of distraction, I didn't reach for the gun. I lunged for the heavy bronze lamp on the nightstand. I swung it with every ounce of strength I had left. The base connected with his temple with a sickening thud. Julian crumpled to the floor, the revolver skidding across the polished hardwood. I didn't wait to see if he was breathing. I grabbed the gun, checked the cylinder, 4 rounds, and ran. I took the stairs down 5 at a time, my knees screaming. I hit the street just as a black SUV pulled up to the curb. 2 men in charcoal suits stepped out. They weren't feds. They were the same Package 2 crew. I ducked into the subway entrance, losing myself in the late-night crowd of commuters and ghosts. The Cloisters. A medieval monastery transported stone by stone to New York. It was a place of silence and shadows, the perfect theater for a final act. I arrived at 10:50 p.m., the moonlight reflecting off the cold stone arches. I felt like I was walking into a tomb. I gripped the brass key in my pocket, the weight of Sarah's life pressing down on me. "I'm here," I shouted into the empty courtyard. "I have the key. Show me my sister." A shadow detached itself from the darkness of the Gothic chapel. It was the man from the gala, the one in the charcoal suit, the one who looked like a CEO's grandfather. But standing next to him was someone I didn't expect, someone who made the ground shift beneath my feet. It was Sarah. She wasn't tied up. She wasn't crying. She was holding a tablet, her fingers moving with the same mathematical precision as mine. "Sarah?" I breathed. My sister looked up, her expression cold and detached. "Hello, Alex. You're late?" The man in the suit chuckled and patted Sarah on the shoulder. "She's a natural, isn't she? We've been waiting for a Vance with the right temperament. You were too busy playing office politics, Alex. Sarah was busy actually writing the key." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Sarah wasn't the victim. She was the architect. "You kidnapped yourself?" I asked, the world spinning. "You let me dismantle the Thorne Empire just so you could take their place?" Sarah stepped forward, the moonlight catching the same cold ambition in her eyes that I'd seen in the mirror for years. "The Thornes were a mess, Alex. They were loud and sloppy. We needed them gone so we could start Phase 3, and you were the perfect tool to do the cleaning." I looked at the brass key in my hand. It wasn't a key to a vault. It was a key to my own destruction. "Phase 3 isn't a business plan, Alex. It's an extinction event for the old guard," Sarah said, her voice devoid of the warmth I had spent my life protecting. The man in the charcoal suit, the one I now realized was the true shadow behind the Thorne Empire, stepped into the light. "The Thornes were merely the bank," he explained smoothly. "Your sister is the mind. And you, Alex, you were the muscle we didn't have to pay for." My stomach churned. I had been played by my own blood. I looked at the brass key in my palm, then back at Sarah. "I destroyed everything for you. I risked prison. I risked my life." Sarah's laugh was sharp and brittle. "You did it for yourself, Alex. You loved the power. You loved having Theodore on a leash. Don't pretend this was about me. She held out her hand, gesturing for the key. Give it to me. The physical core is the only thing missing from the engine. Once I have it, the global markets reset to zero. If you do this, millions of people lose their life savings, I argued, my fingers tightening around the brass. It's not just the Thornes who go down. It's everyone. Sarah shrugged, a gesture so casual it was terrifying. To build something new, the old world has to burn. That's what you taught me, isn't it? Win at any cost. I realized the sister I knew was gone, replaced by a monster I had inadvertently raised in the shadow of my own ambition. The man in the charcoal suit checked his watch. The window is closing, Alex. Hand over the key or we'll be forced to let Julian finish what he started at the penthouse. He's not dead, you know, just very, very angry. As if on cue, a headlight cut through the darkness of the cloister's entrance. A car roared toward the courtyard. Julian had found us. The ghost was back, and he was bringing the Reaper with him. He followed me, I whispered. Sarah's eyes widened with genuine fear for the first time. She knew Julian was a wild card, a man who would rather burn the key than let anyone else hold it. The black SUV screeched to a halt, and Julian stumbled out, his face a mask of dried blood and fury. He wasn't looking for the man in the suit. He was looking at the tablet in Sarah's hand. Give it to me! He screamed, firing a shot into the air. Chaos erupted in the courtyard. The charcoal-suited man's guards drew their weapons, returning fire as they dove behind the stone pillars. I tackled Sarah to the ground just as a bullet shattered a medieval gargoyle above our heads. The key, Alex! Give it to me now! Sarah hissed, reaching for my pocket even as lead flew around us. I pushed her away, realizing that if either of them got the key, the world was over. There was only one way out. I scrambled toward the center of the courtyard, where an ancient stone well sat under the moonlight. Julian, Sarah, I yelled, standing up and holding the brass key high above the dark abyss of the well. Stop, or it goes into the water. The gunfire ceased instantly. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Julian stayed frozen, his gun leveled at my chest. Sarah stood slowly, her face pale. Alex, don't be a fool. That's billions of dollars. It's not dollars, Sarah. It's a cage, I said. I looked at the man in the charcoal suit, who was watching me with a calculated curiosity. You thought I was the muscle. You forgot that I'm the one who knows how to delete things. I looked at Julian, the man who had tried to erase me. You want the world, Julian? You'll have to dive for it. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed the brass key. It didn't go into the well. It flew toward Julian. Julian's eyes lit up with greed. He lunged for the flying metal, his gun hand dropping. But the key was a decoy. It was the heavy bronze lamp piece I'd snatched from the penthouse, not the brass key. As Julian reached out, I didn't wait. I turned to Sarah's tablet, which she had dropped in the scuffle. I smashed my heel into the screen, the glass spiderwebbing instantly. No! Sarah screamed, lunging for the device, but it was too late. The interface was dead. The charcoal-suited man signaled his guards. Enough of this. Kill them all. We'll find the physical core in the wreckage. But before the guards could fire, the courtyard was flooded with searchlights. FBI, drop the weapons. The feds hadn't been at the penthouse. They had been following Julian. Marcus, sitting in the back of a tactical vehicle, had made a deal. He had traded the Thorne's secrets for a chance to take down the man in the suit. The next few minutes were a blur of flashbangs and shouting. I felt hands zip-tying my wrists, pushing me toward the cold stone floor. I saw Sarah being led away, her face a mask of silent rage. Julian was tackled before he could reach his gun. The man in the charcoal suit simply vanished into the shadows of the chapel. By the time the feds breached the inner sanctum, he was gone. He was a ghost that even the FBI couldn't catch. I sat in the back of the police cruiser, the rain starting to fall again. The Thorne Tower was a memory. The millions were redistributed, and my sister was a stranger in handcuffs. A lead agent, a woman with tired eyes and a sharp suit, sat across from me. You've had a busy night, Miss Vance. Embezzlement, extortion, and now a shootout at a museum. You're looking at 20 years, unless you have something very special to tell me. I looked at the agent, then at the brass key still hidden in the lining of my waiter's jacket. They hadn't found the real one. "I have the confession of the Thorne brothers," I said, my voice rasping. "And I have the location of the charcoal man's primary server." The agent leaned in, her interest piqued. "But I want one thing in exchange. I want Sarah placed in a psychiatric facility, not a prison. She's sick, not a criminal." The agent studied me for a long time. "I can't promise that, Alex. But if you give us the man in the suit, I can make sure the DA hears about your cooperation." I nodded. It was the only deal I had left. I handed over the digital recorder with the Thorne brothers' confession. As the car pulled away from the cloisters, I looked at the dark silhouette of the city. I had climbed the glass ceiling just to see it shatter, and now I was standing in the ruins. 1 month later, I was in a low-security federal facility, wearing orange instead of silk. The news on the common room TV showed the final dismantling of the Thorne empire. Theodore and Julian were heading to maximum security. But as the segment ended, a small, coded message flashed in the ticker tape at the bottom of the screen. "The key still turns. Phase 4 begins." I looked at my hands, realizing the game wasn't over. The secretary still had one more secret. The message in the ticker tape was a lightning bolt to my soul. Phase 4. The man in the charcoal suit hadn't just escaped. He had reset the board. I sat on the bolted-down plastic chair of the prison lounge, the flickering light of the TV reflecting in my eyes. I realized then that my victory at the cloisters was exactly what they wanted. I had cleared out the sloppy Thorne brothers so the true masters could operate in total silence. I wasn't a hero. I was a janitor. I had to get out. Not for the money and not for my pride, but because Phase 4 was likely a death sentence for anyone who knew the truth. I looked at the brass key I had swallowed and later recovered, the real key of Solomon. It was a small, cold weight in my pocket. To the guards, it was a trinket. To the world, it was the end of privacy. I needed a way to contact the only person who hated the charcoal man as much as I did. Marcus. 3 days later, I was granted a legal visit. I expected the tired FBI agent, but instead, Marcus sat behind the glass. He wasn't in handcuffs. He looked prosperous, wearing a suit that cost more than my bail. "You made a deal," I whispered into the phone. Marcus nodded, his face unreadable. "The Bureau needed a new head of cybersecurity. I told them I was the best. They didn't know I learned everything from a secretary." "Marcus, they're starting Phase 4, I said, leaning closer to the glass. The redistribution of the Thorne money was the bait. It didn't go to charities. It went into sleeper accounts that Sarah created. They're using that capital to buy the infrastructure of the global grid." Marcus didn't look surprised. "I know. I've seen the traffic. But I can't stop it from the inside, Alex. They've walled me off. I need the physical override. I need the key." I looked around at the cameras. I couldn't just hand it over. "The key is hidden in the one place Sarah never looked," I said, my voice a low hum. "The old typing pool desk at Thorne Tower, floor 12, station 4, under the gum." It was a lie, but Marcus caught the glint in my eye. He knew the typing pool had been demolished months ago. The real key was in my hand, pressed against the underside of the visiting table. As Marcus stood to leave, he dropped his briefcase. In the split second the guard looked away to help him, I slapped the brass key onto the magnetic strip on the bottom of the case. It was a move I'd practiced 1,000 times in the office when Theodore wasn't looking. Marcus didn't blink. He picked up his bag, gave me a sharp nod, and walked out. For the first time in a month, I felt like the secretary again. The one who actually ran the room. That night, the prison went into total lockdown. The power cut out, the electronic cells groaning as they defaulted to open. This wasn't an accident. This was Marcus using the key. I stepped out into the dark hallway, the red emergency lights painting the walls in blood. I didn't head for the main gate. I went to the infirmary, where Sarah was being held in the psych ward. If I was leaving this life, I wasn't leaving her behind to be their lab rat. I found her in a padded cell, staring at the ceiling. She didn't look like a genius anymore. She looked like a broken child. "Alex," she whispered as I broke the electronic lock. "Are they coming for me?" I grabbed her hand, pulling her up. No one is coming for you, Sarah. We're going to them. We ran through the service tunnels, guided by the vibrating pulses of my phone. Marcus was sending me the clean route in real time. We emerged in a rainy alleyway 2 miles from the prison. A black sedan was waiting. Marcus was in the driver's seat, the brass key sitting on the dashboard like a trophy. The charcoal man is at the New York Stock Exchange, Marcus said, handing me a laptop. He's not hiding anymore. He's going to initiate the final wipe in 20 minutes. If he does, the Thorne fraud becomes the new global standard. We sped through the empty streets of Manhattan. The city felt like a graveyard. Sarah sat in the back, her fingers slowly returning to life as she took the laptop from my hands. I can't stop the wipe, Alex, she murmured, her eyes scanning the code. But I can redirect the destination. I can send the money back to the people it was actually stolen from. But it requires a physical connection to the NYSE mainframe. The stock exchange was a fortress, surrounded by the man in the charcoal suit's private army. We didn't try to sneak in. Marcus rammed the sedan through the front bronze doors, the airbags deploying in a cloud of white dust. I crawled out, the brass key gripped in my fist. Sarah was right behind me, her tablet glowing. Go, Marcus yelled, drawing his weapon to cover the stairs. I'll hold them off. Finish the job. We reached the balcony overlooking the trading floor. The man in the charcoal suit was standing there, watching the digital boards as they began to flicker and die. He turned to us, his expression one of bored disappointment. You just don't know when to quit, Alex. You've destroyed 2 empires tonight. Why not make it a third? I didn't answer. I threw the brass key to Sarah. She caught it and jammed it into the balcony's diagnostic port. The screens on the floor turned from red to a brilliant, blinding white. What are you doing? The man roared, lunging toward Sarah. I stepped in front of him, the heavy glass decanter I'd swiped from the lobby raised high. I'm not a secretary anymore, I hissed. I didn't hit him. I smashed the decanter into the diagnostic port, fusing the brass key into the hardware forever. The connection wasn't just made, it was permanent. The digital boards began to scroll names, thousands of names, the victims of the Thorne fraud, the pensioners, the charities, the small-time investors. Their balances weren't just restored, they were tripled using the charcoal man's own secret reserves. The man fell to his knees, watching his life's work dissolve into a million acts of restitution. You've ruined everything, he whispered. I looked at Sarah, who was finally smiling. No, I said. We just balanced the books. The police sirens arrived, but this time they weren't for us. Marcus had uploaded the charcoal man's true identity to every news agency on the planet. He was no longer a ghost, he was a headline. I took Sarah's hand and walked toward the back exit, leaving the chaos behind. We had no money, no home, and our names were still on every most wanted list in the country. But as we hit the rainy street, I felt the weight finally lift. We stood at the edge of the harbor, watching the sun rise over a city that had no idea it had been saved. Marcus joined us, tossing his badge into the water. So, he said, looking at me, what does a former CEO, a security expert, and a math genius do now? I looked at the horizon, a small, dangerous smile playing on my lips. The world still has a lot of glass ceilings left, Marcus. I think it's time we started breaking them for real. We walked into the morning mist, 3 ghosts ready to haunt the powerful. The blackmail was over, the romance was a lie, but the partnership was the only thing that was real. My name is Alex Vance. I used to be a secretary. Now, I'm the reason the powerful sleep with the lights on. The game didn't end at Thorne Tower, it just got a whole lot more expensive, and I'm finally the one who owns the debt.